Hello, dear friends. Today is the 14th of July, Monday, and a few minutes ago, Donald Trump announced a statement that Fox Channel, which is perhaps the only American channel that supports Trump, announced as a historic statement. Historic decision, a turning point in the war. Well, let's take a look at what was there in order to understand it the most clearly, because I cannot assess it unambiguously. In fact, no decision is unambiguous. Let's start with how it all started and how it was all organized. This decision, its foundation, the root of this decision goes to the last NATO session, which took place about 2 weeks ago. And this session is considered very successful even in Washington, which, according to current concepts, according to the norms that are now in place here, is very unusual. First of all, because NATO agreed to increase the cost of defense by 5%. This means greater independence, and in a peculiar way it coincided with the interests of both Washington and European members of NATO. And I will tell you, Ukraine is also good. During this discussion, this idea of how to organize the help of Ukraine, which was announced today, showed the unity of approaches of both Europeans, Democrats, and Republicans. Which is very rare nowadays. The basis of all this was the well-known share of anti-Putinism in various of its manifestations, of which I have called Europeans and Democrats. It manifested itself much more than the Republicans. The Republicans also broke up into two camps, the larger ones, the more expensive ones. As for Trump, he turned out to be, well, we'll see later. I had the impression that he turned out to be something floating in the abyss, which had not yet been determined where. The shore to which it could be attached. The weakest link in this whole team that discussed this decision was Trump himself. As I told you, from my point of view, there are two parties fighting around him. On the one hand, it's the Geschäft party, or Babala, or big money. On the other hand, it's the party of ego, selfishness, self-loathing, self-sacrifice. And so it happened that the ice fell when the second party, the self-sacrifice party, began to take over the Babala party. And I must say that this break, which served as the reason for today's statement, is a result, a handmade result of the actions of Putin himself, so it's not strange. This is practically a kind of interpretation of the Pushkin fairy tale about an evil, stupid old woman who dreamed of becoming a seafarer, and in the end she turned out to be a broken shell. Trump, as soon as he did not please Putin, he ignored all the concessions and gifts that Tsarsky made to him. Here is one of the last phone conversations between them. Trump calls him and says, "I just made you a czar's gift, restored all the help to Ukraine. Give me something in return. I need it too. I am also a politician, the head of state. I have a difficult situation in the country. Why don't we talk further?" And then he answers, "Mr. President, although I don't know what his name is now, I am going to increase the attacks on the territory of Ukraine in the next 60 days, or make another powerful throw forward." In order to take over new territories, it is desirable to reach the administrative borders of those territories, which I boldly in.
Административных границ тех территорий, которые я нагло нарушаю все
Violation of all norms of
правила Конституции
international law included in my Russian constitution. That is, this impudence is incredible.
Это может сделать только человек,
It can
который
only be
имеет
done by a person who has somehow lost the real feeling of his country in space, or a person who considers his interlocutor, that is, the President of the United States,
ну, считает
as
своего собеседника, то есть президента Соединенных Штатов,
if he were in his pocket,
себя
that
в
is, he
карман.
was completely relaxed, he was sure that he would swallow it
Уверен,
one.
что этот проглотит еще один раз. Но так сложились, выстроились планеты, что внутри
More
страны
time, but so the planets have formed that inside the country Trump has accumulated a number of serious problems. One of them is the list of Epstein, the list of pedophiles, who is there,
списка Эпштейна, списка педофила. Кто там есть?
who is
Кто
not
там?
there, and if he is at all. That
Есть ли
is,
он
it would
вообще?
seem to be a nonsense for
Тогда
someone who is not
становится
dedicated.
всё, ну, какая чушь. Тем не менее,
Nevertheless, this is a
грандиозность
grandiose
которая
scandal that is now growing like a snowball, which has already led to a serious split in the ranks of Republican.
привел к тому, что наметился серьезный раскол в рядах республиканских сторонников.
Supporters of Trump, a split even in his team, and Trump needed to do something. That is, he could not afford such affront from Putin's side.
Такого афронта со стороны Путина он себе позволить не мог.
And so, the party of angered Trump switched to an offensive. Although, on the other hand, it should be said that the Bablaya or Geshefta party did not disappear.
Хотя, с другой стороны, надо сказать, что партия Бабла или Гешефта, она не исчезла.
And the evidence of this was present in the Oval Office today, when Trump made his statement.
Сегодня, когда Трамп делал свое заявление,
Steve Vitkov is his main man, his special envoy in all Geshefta's foreign affairs.
его спецпосланник по всем гешефтным внешнеполитическим делам.
Well, he wasn't sitting in a chair or in the front row, he was standing like a journalist in a crowd. But nevertheless, I think that his presence there was completely inappropriate.
Но тем не менее, я думаю, что по большому счету его присутствие было там совершенно неуместно.
I think it was a signal, and a signal vis-a-vis, so to speak, Mr. Vitkov from the Kremlin.
Визави, так сказать, господина Виткова от Кремля.
In addition, Mr. Dmitriev, who heads the Fund for Direct Investments, and whose main merit is that he is
прямых инвестиций, так называемых, у которого основное достоинство то, что он женат
married to a
на
close friend of
близкой
Putin's
подруге,
daughter, who herself is considered almost Putin's heir to the position of head of the Russian state.
рассматривается чуть ли не в наследнице Путина на должности главы российского государства.
And it was the contact between Vitkov and Dmitriev, and a few months ago they laid the basis of such a euphoria in the
И положили несколько месяцев назад основу этой эйфории Вашингтонской
Washington Party of Money. They said, everything will be fine, we will offer large discounts, and Trump will not stand.
гешефты, и Трамп не устоит.
And then somehow Putin bent the stick, and this led to a crisis. It must be said that from an operational point of view, this is, of course, a failure.
Надо сказать, что с оперативной точки зрения это, конечно, это провал.
This characterizes why Putin was called, at one time, by the Committee of State Security, Bleno Amali and Okurko. That is, to put so much time to work on building relations with Trump, that it is necessary to take more than
Чтобы вот так вот, когда это вот нужно больше, чем когда-либо.
ever and destroy it with some idiotic phrase. In short, Trump was offended and leaks of mass media were happening.
Трамп обиделся, и происходили утечки в средства массовой информации.
They were happening yesterday, and today's speech showed that it was not determined in any way. Indeed, it seems to be in the abyss.
Он как будто находится в проруби.
Because look, his closest supporter, a supporter who is being embraced even here in his words.
Сторонник, которому внимают даже здесь, в его словам.
Considering that this is what Trump says to him, and I mean Senator Lindsey Graham, he spoke yesterday, said that tomorrow Kuvalda would be announced.
Рассказывал, что завтра будет оглашена кувалда, которую мы
Which we will then impose on Putin, on Russia, on those countries that are filling Putin's military vessel. And that's it, everything will be, victory will be ours.
Все будет, победа будет за нами.
It was yesterday, the second half of the day. They probably had to discuss it all. I'm almost sure that Graham, before going on this show, it was an important show to the nation. He called Trump again, and Trump probably confirmed to him that your bill will pass. This is about a 500% increase in tariffs against those countries that trade with Russia. And today all this flies by. It is typical that after listening to yesterday's speech by Lindsey Graham, about the terrible speech of Trump that is scheduled for today, this morning in Moscow, Dmitriev spoke with a statement according to which all these threats that we hear are allegedly coming from the White House. This is so. Well, we understand the political situation. Well, it is necessary to say, well, they will say. Well, the most important thing is constructive business talks, serious issues, which we are leading, he, through Vitkov, and everything will be fine there. And I think that this is his statement and kind of a message back from Moscow to Washington. Guys, we will understand everything, so consider it necessary to make some statements. Do it. We are sure that we will meet on the shore where we agreed. And not by chance, when Trump's speech ended today, the index on the Moscow Stock Exchange soared, as they say, by 2.4%. Well, somewhere like that approximately. Well, that is, which recently is not often found on the Moscow Stock Exchange. That is, they expected the worst, worse than what was said. I am sure that in the near future, the GESHEVT party will undergo even more serious work. The Geshevtines, or the money involved in the proposals that will be made through Dmitry Vitkov and then through the hierarchy of power. I am sure that the attractiveness of the GESHEVT on these projects will increase seriously in the coming days. The next, let's say, 50 days. On the eve of today's Trump's performance, people who study him, Americans, journalists, analysts who have been studying him for decades, expressed the opinion that Trump was really seriously offended by Putin, and that he realized that he was being divorced as a boy. Why? Because he himself, they say, is such an amateur of the divorce of rabbits, and he himself regularly dealt with all his business career. Therefore, he feels when he is being divorced like this, and he certainly felt that Putin was treating him like this, and it touched him. He considered himself a master of this maneuver. And that time he was used against him, the great Donald Trump. Therefore, of course, objectively, the offense was hidden. And one of the leading experts on Trump, a correspondent of one of the leading American newspapers, he expressed a thought. I listened to him the day before yesterday, expressed a thought that he really concealed a serious offense, so we must wait for very serious steps from him. But still, I am sure that from what Trump said today, it can be seen that there is a struggle inside between these two parties already in the depths of his soul. On the one hand, self-loathing, a desire to spit on one's physiognomy. And on the other hand, where are the plans of the bulk of these cheap deals? On this background, these things were announced today, which was announced the day before by the Fox channel as a turning historical moment. And today, after Trump announced these new moves, Fox's host commented, saying, well, what he said is another question.
Ну, то, что он сказал, это другой вопрос.
And you noticed his tone, that is, what an angry, harsh tone he said. To be honest, I didn't find anything serious, threatening, as usual.
Ничего такого серьезного, угрожающего. Как
It
обычно,
seems that he was chewing
он что
something when he
чего, когда
spoke,
говорил.
so the action that
Итак,
Trump announced today
действия, которые
consists of two
анонсировал
parts.
сегодня Трамп, они состоят из двух частей.
The first part is
Одна
sanctions against Russia, the second is weapons.
санкции в отношении России, вторая это оружие.
Sanctions, he said that if in the course of 50 days Putin does not go to the ceasefire, as Trump demanded, then the administration is conducting a 100% sanctions against Russia.
100% санкции.
The second part, that is, against the same India, China, Brazil was connected there. They managed to connect because recently Trump did not like BRICS because they talked about the need to introduce a currency that would compete with the dollar. It was nonsense, I would tell you about it. The Russian representative said something in the couloirs which was not even discussed publicly at the last BRICS meeting. Nevertheless, Trump got involved and then he was put there. The whole BRICS is trading with Putin in this way, therefore it is necessary to introduce the main players of BRICS against them. Well, 100. 100 is less than 500, which has already been prepared by Vince Graham and Senator Blumenthal, and which, as Graham said yesterday, will be announced today and we will immediately accept it, and it will be a sledgehammer, which we will hit on Putin's head. So 500 went down to 100. Although those 500 they will continue, Trump said, I don't know, they will take it or not, let them take it. Anyway, they have to give me the right to make the decision. Use them or not use them, well, and then 50 days, you know, again, now not 2 weeks, but already 50 days. Well, and most importantly, there is no illusion in Washington that if such sanctions are introduced against China, India, and there, you know that 100%, that 500. 100 is all. This is the end of any Indian or Chinese import from the United States of America. So if this happens and if such tariffs are introduced against India and China, as a result, international prices on the international market, prices for oil will drop somewhere like this, well, for 100 up to $150 per barrel. And if you remember, even at the very beginning of the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, with reference to serious experts in this area, I would say that the West cannot afford to have an oil price above $100. Therefore, no matter what the threat comes from Russia, if it smells like a price above $100, not to mention $150, then it is necessary to turn this war immediately under any conditions. And then specific steps were taken. Saudi Arabia was gradually reduced. Remember this story. Therefore, nobody is seriously going to introduce sanctions now, which can end with $150 per bar. Therefore, this is a conversation for the public, in order to express the seriousness of the moment. Although what surprises me is that European countries say that everything must be introduced. I don't know, maybe they want to make an impression on their voters. Maybe they need it for some other political reasons. But in terms of applying a blow to the Russian military chest with gold, it will hardly have much effect. Therefore, let's postpone it to the second plan and move on to the supply of weapons. Well, the last weeks while Trump called him, after almost every such conversation, Putin made more and more massive raids on the Ukrainian territory. Once there were 200 drones, then 300 something, then it was already 500. The last one was over 700, and already experts say that it will soon reach 1,000 and so on. That is a terrible, terrible blow from the sky of Ukraine. Something needs to be done urgently. And in this regard, I believe the most serious decision that was announced today was made. It is about the immediate supply of a certain number of Patriot batteries. Battery means together with the combat kit, that is, with interceptors. What number was not mentioned, but it was there. In general, if you remember, a few days ago I told you that, in the opinion of Russian military specialists, the figure that will seriously matter for Russians, the number of Patriots in Ukraine is 12. That is, if it is less than 12, then somehow Russia will be able to continue massive raids. If it is 12 and more, then it will be more difficult. That is, apparently some 12 batteries, I would say more, will allow to cover the largest cities of Ukraine or the main directions in which these raids are now taking place, and thus seriously protect the sky of Ukraine from these massive attacks. We're not talking about specific figures, we're talking about questions and answers. What happens? The United States has agreed with the Western European allies that some of them, right at the end of the day, will give their batteries to the Patriots of Ukraine. In terms of quantity, Trump said that some country has 17 and this country has 12, and a significant part of these 12 will be transferred to Ukraine. In Ukraine, again, according to Russian estimates, today Ukraine already has about 7 batteries. That is, we are talking about a significant number of batteries, which I hope will be no less than 12, but maybe more. That is, it will be put by some of the European countries. Even the United States has said that they will put several batteries from their own. Well, the calculations, they will go through NATO. In general, the entire system of calculations the United States transmits, or they're already in Europe, there is American weapons. They transmit to Ukraine, Europeans, and then the United States supplies. Their weapons, that is, in the end, 100% of the weapons that will be transferred to Ukraine by these deals will be paid by Europeans. I will announce the first group of countries that took on the burden of financial responsibility. Thank God, it is Norway, the richest country in this. Regard where the national fund is incomparable, perhaps, with any other country in the world. Germany, then Denmark, Finland, I named a few more countries. We are working. With the rest, I said, so the first thing that will be put in place is these Patriots, which will significantly improve anti-missile defense against the enemy attack. Well, it should be understood that every Patriot interceptor costs about $3 million, so they will not knock down the Shad. The Shad is sent in hundreds. Therefore, it is still necessary to solve the question of how to fight the growing, rapidly growing number of Shad, and to solve the question of what concerns the protection of the peaceful territory of Ukraine, and we still have a task that was laid out in its analytical article, which I laid out in the previous video. The task is to protect the soldier on the battlefield, to protect the same. Drones, if you do not protect him, then the life of the soldier on the battlefield, if he is open in this range, in the crater of death of 45 kilometers, the life of his life is 15 minutes. And this needs to be solved quickly and effectively. It is about the supply of other types of weapons that have not been announced now, but the leaks about them were in the media on the eve of today's Trump speech. In the US, now in the Pentagon, there is an inventory. As Trump said, we produce the best types of weapons in.
Как сказал Трамп, мы производим топовые виды вооружений.
Our class, the best in the world, we will deliver them to Ukraine.
Мы их будем поставлять в Украину.
For example, NATO or some other NATO.
Понимаете, там какой-то сумбур, вот тут идет кто-то, НАТО будет это, или отдельные страны НАТО. В разговоре они употребляют слово НАТО, то есть мы, НАТО.
Countries use the word NATO. We, NATO, deliver it, and the general.
Генеральный секретарь НАТО, что говорит о том, что НАТО это ключевой игрок во всей этой схеме.
Secretary of NATO is sitting next to
Соединенные Штаты
him, saying that NATO is the key player in this whole scheme. That is, the United States is delivering NATO to specific countries from this NATO, with which the agreement already exists, pays for all this, and then it is transferred to Ukraine. That is, potentially in addition to the defense system of weapons, because I heard right away, as soon as the speech ended, I looked at what was going on in the agency, or in the social media, there was disappointment. Where is the offensive weapons, and so on. There was a lot of talk about it, but they won't announce it yet. I understand why. Because Trump still represents all this as this is not my war, this is Biden's war. Biden is the former president of the United States, former United States. And I am the current one. This is no longer our war, I am ending it. That is, he does it as much as possible. He even took a step forward compared to what the opposition was like 3-4 days ago. In general, he emphasized that he was not going to pass on any patriots from the American territory, so that there was no conversation, oh, you put American patriots from your territory, so you are participating in the war. No, they wanted to put only European ones. That is what they say now. Some batteries will be from the territory of the United States. This is already a step forward. But nevertheless, he continues to claim that this is not his war, and this suggests that, guys, the business project is not closed. Let's think, consider, maybe agree. But in the meantime, the inventory is passing, and, as Trump formulated this task, it is about to give, to protect Ukraine, not only from the sky. But to give Ukraine, the Soviet Union, to protect its territory in connection with the expected, as Putin told him, offensive of the orcs in the next, the next 60 days. Here in fact is the situation, the scheme of transfer. What kind of amount are they going to transfer? He said, we have billions of dollars and we are ready. Newest billions of dollars, the scheme is clear. But when he was asked, you still have $3.85 billion from Biden. This is the idea, that is, the right of the president. From the arsenal of the Pentagon right now to take it, not to ask anyone and to transfer it. We have an idea, we have a plan, so maybe we put it somewhere on our own, so to speak, a trap just in case. While we are working on the scheme that he announced, now the question arose, again, these were leaks with a reference to high-ranking representatives of the administration. There is no exception to the supply of long-range weapons. There was even talk of weapons that could reach Moscow. Today this topic was not announced, but there was a leak. Perhaps this is also a signal to Putin in a peculiar way. Then, in terms of payments, 5%, or rather 5 billion from the money of the Russian Central Bank, which is frozen on the territory of the United States in America. It is not excluded that they can be used. You know, the Europeans have much more. There are almost up to 300 billion. And as the leaks were even the day before, now there is a lot of work to find a mutually acceptable solution on how they can be used to finance this. Help to Ukraine. Today, it was repeatedly emphasized, it was evident in Trump's speech, that he was impressed by the determination of the European countries.
Он впечатлен решимостью стран Европы дать
To
реальный
give
ответ
real,
на
firm
санкции.
resistance to Putin, he even had a particularly joyful
Его даже
impression.
произвело
He was,
такое
judging by the
особо
way he looked, he was
радужное
even happy about it.
впечатление. Он был, судя по тому, как он выглядел, говорил, он был даже этому рад.
But thank God, as I said, a
Но слава
three-way
богу, то есть
coalition
по
was
большому
formed.
счету сложилась
These are
ситуация, в которой
Europeans, these are Democrats here, some
трехсторонняя
Republicans.
коалиция – это европейцы, это демократы здесь, часть республиканцев.
But the weakest
Самым
link,
слабым
or rather
звеном, менее
unpredictable in all
непредсказуемым во
this,
всем
as
этом
I
деле,
said, I
это
consider
потенциал,
Trump
я считаю,
himself.
самого Трампа.
In general, as I understood the day
В
before
целом,
today's speech, during today's
как я
speech in general, the
понял,
role of
вернул
NATO and
информативного
Europe is
выступления, в
growing.
ходе сегодняшнего выступления, в целом возрастает роль НАТО и Европы. Это
This
тоже
is also a
необходимо
very
прерывать,
positive
потому
phenomenon
что,
because,
ну,
well, a
если
few months
согласитесь,
ago, everyone was
все
thinking,
люди
will the United
ждут
States,
ежедневно, что
that is,
вот
Trump, leave Europe
Трамп
at all and
уйдет
break the
вообще из
door?
Европы и хлопнет дверью. Нет.
No cooperation will expand,
Сотрудничество
and Trump
будет
welcomed this
расширяться,
matter
и Трамп
publicly.
это дело приветствовал публично. То есть
It is
сейчас
good for NATO, for Europe, and
выкинуться
for
и резко менять свою позицию будет, ну, не совсем неудобно, скажем так. То есть это хорошо и для НАТО, и для
Ukraine,
Европы,
because
и
the
для
most active
Украины.
supporters and allies of
Мы
Ukraine in this whole scheme are currently the countries of Europe, whose security
Украины во всей этой схеме в настоящее время являются страны Европы, от которых безопасность которых
depends on the
зависит от
security of
безопасности
Ukraine,
Украины.
and this is
Это
the
лучше
best
всего
incentive for
для
this
того,
project
чтобы
to work
этот
quickly
проект
and
заработал
effectively.
быстро
Now Trump
и
is under a lot of
эффективно.
pressure from all sides.
Сейчас на Трампа идет давление, по большому счету, со всех
As
сторон.
I said, he is being pressured by these
Как я вам
lists of
сказал, его
Epstein's
давят
beep,
вот эти
the
ссылки
deceased, so to
педофила
speak, who laid his hands on
Эпштейна,
himself.
усопшего, так сказать, или который на себя руки наложил.
The scandal, it would seem, is in an
Скандал,
empty place, but the
казалось
scandal
бы,
is not a
на пустом
joke.
месте.
That is,
Скандал
the
ничего себе,
MAGA is a significant part of the most firm
значительную
supporters of
часть,
Trump.
причем самых таких твердых сторонников Трампа из
The
МАГА
MAGA
считают,
thinks
что
that they have
их
been
нагло
impudently
и
and cruelly
жестко
deceived.
обманули.
The deception is that in the
Из
course of
обмана
the
заключается в
presidential
том,
election
что
campaign, before that, well, that's
в
how the
ходе
suicide of
предвыборной
Epstein
кампании
happened.
президентской до этого, ну вот как случилось самоубийство Эпштейна.
The MAGA people, first of all, the
Маговцы,
MAGA
эти
people,
самые
and the people who are now in
сейчас
Trump's
входят в
team, they
команду
immediately
Трампа,
made a
они
fuss about the
запустили
fact that
сразу
Epstein is on the
того,
list.
что есть в списке Эпштейна,
And there are,
и
in
там
general, all the
фигурирует
well-known
больше всех.
Democrats.
Все
But only
известные
Biden was
демократы.
probably not there,
Но
and
только
only
Байдена
because it
там
was
не было
impossible
просто,
to
потому что
imagine.
невозможно себе представить
And the
участие
participants of this
этой
gang were no
банды
longer ageable,
по
and there
возрасту
were
уже
all
не
of them,
подходила. А
and
там
all
все
the
были,
Democrats.
и все демократы, и
And in
вообще
general,
вся
the whole ideology,
идеология,
the
вся
whole
идеология,
ideology, the
весь
whole
бред
nonsense of the MAGA,
МАГА
so conspirological,
и
consisted in the following,
конспирологический,
that the
он
whole
состоял в
leadership of the
следующем,
Democratic
что
Party is
все
BP
руководство демократической
perverts
партии это сексуальные извращенцы и
and
педофилы.
pedophiles, but Trump and
А вот
together with them, they are
нам,
almost messengers from
счастливым,
another
чудным
galaxy,
посланцами другой
representatives of the
галактики,
power of good, which this dragon
представителями
hydra
сил
must
добра,
defeat.
которые должны, значит, этого дракона, гидру эту победить.
And
И
Trump, his
там
representatives in the
его
course of the presidential
представители в ходе
campaign
президентской
promised how
кампании
Trump will
обещали,
become
как он станет
president, and then
президентом,
these
эти
lists will be
списки подтвердили.
published. They
Глупо,
swore
что
that they
не
saw them, that they
творили
were
ничего
there, and so
неправильного.
on.
А потом
And
раз,
then, when the question
значит,
arose, where are they?
спасибо,
First, some kind of confusion followed. It is not clear whether there was. They began to say, what is there to look at? There is nothing interesting there. And then they said that they were not there at all. Well, and so on. And it became a clear message, even for the representatives of the MAGA, because they were simply deceived as the last loopholes. And I have a neighbor here, he lives, he has a son, a teenager. Well, how a teenager, he is already 21 years old. Trump's supporter was just incredible. Such a concrete, he did not take any arguments against. Let's meet now and ask, well, how so? This is a collapse in the young soul of a 21-year-old American. There was a mental collapse. He realized that he was impudently deceived. That's all. He and the magician are not on the way. Trump hates him. How so? Who was I accepted for? That's the situation, and it's growing like a snow cone, and it's getting worse and worse for Trump. That's why we need something positive, and let's hope that this project of providing help to Ukraine can serve as a positive. That is, the question is like this. Look at the dry remains. The sky above Ukraine is not completely closed, but much better and faster. This is what is needed now. Well, it's just a matter of life and death for many on the territory of Ukraine. The issue will be resolved within days. Then work is underway now on the inventory, the arrival of, as Trump said, on the latest types of weapons. Also offensive on billions of dollars, and all this should be delivered to Ukraine. The day before, well, or at the beginning of these 60 days, during which Putin announced his next attempt, his next offensive on the territory of Ukraine. There is a strong, finally, such an alliance has formed that can, in principle, work effectively, because it includes both the magician in some degree and Trump himself. That is, the magician who is also for Trump and Trump himself and the Europeans. Europeans are vital. It is obvious now they are vital to the success of this project, because they, unlike Trump, understand that their safety there. Fate depends on the safety of the fate of Ukraine, and this is what I see positively in the direction of today's statement. It was not as dramatic as it might have been. I will tell you about the B-2 with the bomb that was dropped on Iran, let's say on the Kremlin. There was no such thing. But what was laid down in today's speech, it would be better, of course, I don't know, the White House or the State Department probably will describe it all in the end. How will it all happen? Because Trump usually holds such crazy press conferences, they often don't understand what he's talking about. For example, today journalists are asking him, what if Putin announces these events, if you start implementing them, and Putin goes on escalation further? Are you ready for further escalation? The answer from the President of the United States is, don't ask me these questions. If Biden answered like that, how much more fear would rise? It's still quiet, calm, no one is voicing yet, but many people laugh. I mean, there is a positive aspect. The aspect that worries me, it also exists. That is, from these movements, statements, these signals that send each other the presence of Vidya and the statement of Dmitriev on the eve of Trump's speech. It is obvious to me personally that in Moscow they hope, no, they are forced to prepare some kind of super cheap offer, a project. And here, apparently, they are ready to consider it. That's why they are sending signals. 50 days to consider it all, and in the meantime, we will supply it. Therefore, we will observe how it all will happen. By and large, this is what worries me. In fact, the only demand that Trump has put forward to Putin is to go to a truce, a 30-day truce. And Putin does not want to accept it, he moves on. And this is what caused Trump's anger, his performance today. Let's assume the situation now. Putin will agree, he will go to a truce, although it will be hard for him now because he brought the conflict to a high point. Now to the point where it will be determined which of them is a boy. Who will withstand the blow and who will break? In this situation, Putin will be biting at the business, let the foam out of his mouth, but he will bet on his own. There is a high probability of such a development of the event that for him Russia will be worse. But let's imagine Putin agrees and says, I agree to the truce.
и говорит: «Я согласен на перемирие».
Okay, the truce is announced, the negotiations begin, and Putin immediately exposes his maximum claims and demands.
Максимальные претензии и требования. А вы
And you know them, which are completely unacceptable for Ukraine and unacceptable for Europe.
и неприемлемы для Европы.
But here in Washington, in the heart of President Trump, the Geshev party comes to the arena and tells,
Трампа выходит на арену партия Гешефта и подсказывает:
"Look how much money we have. Hasn't it time to pressure Ukraine now?"
не пришло ли время теперь на Украину надавить?
And it turns out that at such a price, this 30-day truce was obtained to get the maximum demands from Russia at this truce.
Добыто вот это перемирие 30-дневное, чтобы на этом перемирии получить от Раши максимальные требования.
And Trump will stand on the side of Russia and say, "No, we need to be practical. We need to end this war. This is not my war. This is Biden. Let Biden figure it out." You can worry me, gentlemen, but for now, let's follow the details.
Ну а пока давайте следить за деталями.
That is, everything most important will appear in the details that will appear in the leaks that we will learn about in the coming days. What will I inform you about regularly?
О чем я вас буду информировать?
For now, dear friends, even from the fact that life is announced today in Ukraine, at least a little bit, but it will become, I don't even know if the
Хоть чуть-чуть, но станет, ну, я даже не знаю, слово
word
нормально.
normalization is appropriate or not, it will become more bearable, maybe so. And the prospects for the US to cope with their tasks and hold the orcs, or maybe they will make a defeat on certain areas, this is now growing and
И удержат орков, а может быть и нанесут поражение на определенных участках.
becoming possible. Even yesterday, before Trump's speech, the situation turned out to be very dramatic, I will tell you, because some analysts here, well, not that some,
Потому что некоторые аналитики здесь, да не то, что некоторые.
some through which the leak occurred, these are Pentagon analysts, calculated that if the current trend continues, then somewhere by September.
Если нынешняя тенденция продолжится, то где-то к сентябрю месяцу, к осени,
Month by autumn, the ratio of supply of ammunition, artillery shells of Russia and Ukraine will be in the ratio of 7 to 1.
снарядами России и Украины будет в соотношении 7 к 1.
But this is a very difficult situation that would have happened for the armed forces of Ukraine. Now, after this,
Сложилось для вооруженных сил Украины. Сейчас, после этого выступления Трампа, здесь ситуация должна значительно
Trump's speech, the
улучшиться.
situation here should be significantly improved. Therefore, dear friends, as usual, the enemy will be defeated by the words of Ukraine and the armed forces. The victory will be ours. I wish you, dear friends, endurance, courage, firm faith in our inevitable victory. Keep it up. See you soon.
До новых встреч.